Welcome back to the HubScale podcast, the podcast where we dive into the minds of security leaders all around the world. This week, we have Gaidar Magdanurov, the president of Acronis. Gaidar's been with the business for around 11 years now through various different positions across marketing, strategy, success. Gaidar, welcome to the podcast.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Elliot.
And for the listeners who don't know who you are, please feel free to introduce yourself and Acronis.
Yeah, just a quick introduction. Acronis is the cyber protection company. We are building the platform for managed service providers that they can use to deliver a variety of services: backup, disaster recovery, cybersecurity, management, automation, and so on and so forth. And we have the complete platform that managed service providers can use to fully integrate all the tools that they are using and deliver their own technical stack. And as for myself, I have a background in science and software engineering. And then I've been doing different jobs. I was an investor, I was working in marketing, I was working in sales. So I have quite a diverse experience in business and technology.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And Gaidar, we've known each other for a couple of years. I know one of the key things that I always take away when we ever connect is how busy you always are as an executive at Acronis. Always seem to be flying from Sofia, Boston. It's an amazing journey that you've gone on over the last couple of years with the business.
You know, when I started my career and my first corporate job was at Microsoft, I thought that more I'll grow, higher title I have, more people I have working for me, then I'll be working less and less. But it never happens. Like higher you grow, it's just more work you get, just different work. That's what keeps me going because it's really interesting because we do incredibly interesting projects and something new is happening all the time.
Yeah, amazing. And I guess just before we go into the specific topics that we're going to discuss today. I know yesterday we were just talking before we recorded this that Acronis have announced the new XDR to the portfolio. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I'll tell you a long story if you don't mind. So Acronis was a backup company for many, many years. It was founded in Singapore in 2003. And since then, Acronis evolved because at some point we realized that backup is not enough. Security is not enough. You have to have integration. That's when we coined the term cyber protection, data protection, cybersecurity together. And that we were the first vendor doing that. And the reason we did that is because we understood that all the new modern threats, and there are more and more different threats now, and especially with the use of AI, attackers can actually leverage zero-day vulnerabilities quite easily. And in general, there are just more tools that help attackers to orchestrate the attacks. So we need to have security that enforces data protection and data protection used for security. So I'll just give you a quick example is that we can use the backup data to learn and use it as a secondary copy for the AI that we use for detection, but also we can clean up the malware from backup. So we can detect malware that is impossible to detect on a running system. We can actually remove malware on recovery, and we can also do the patch management on recovery. So you're not recovering to the previous state, but you're recovering to the clean state after cyber attack. That's an example how security and backup can work together, improving each other. That's why we started to invest about 10 years ago, slightly more than 10 years ago, into this integration of security and data protection. We hired a complete security team. And then over the last 10 years, we were evolving our portfolio, starting from behavioral detection for ransomware and automated recovery to XDR right now, because we see that market evolves. And at this point of time, you have to have XDR. There's just no way that you can protect against all the modern threats without it.
Interesting. And I think going back to what you're saying, obviously investing quite heavily over the last 10 years into the space, the state of cybersecurity in general has changed a lot over the last few years. Obviously, we've had the catalyst, which was COVID, and even before then as well. One of the key topics that we wanted to discuss today was just the general state of cybersecurity as it relates to the MSP world, as it relates to the SMB landscape. What would you say from your perspective is needed to have a reasonable level of protection today?
So I would start from talking about the evolution of cybercrime in general. So the key issue with cybercrime is that it's still relatively hard to locate the people that are doing those attacks. So it's relatively low risk and high reward business. That's why there are more and more people and organizations doing that. So it's not going anywhere. And what we see, what happened over the last 10 years is that there's a lot of tools and automation. If 10 years ago we just started to see ransomware as a service, now it's kind of a standard. Like lots of people can go on dark web and just become distributors of ransomware. What we've seen from our own research is that there are fewer ransomware families right now, but there are more ways to deliver that ransomware. That's one example of what's going on. And then if I think about what happened over the last couple of years, we have Gen AI, we have all those LLMs that actually helping everybody, and they have helping attackers. What we see from our research, 80 to 90% of attacks are happening through phishing. It's email, it's the phishing websites, now it's deep fakes that people use. And AI helps attackers to be extremely creative. If in the past, to be creative, you'll have to invest a lot of time, research something about your potential victim. Now, what you can do, you can just use AI to scan Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever tools you have available, and then create very sophisticated phishing attacks. And that's happening. And an interesting observation here is that we all got used to phishing emails being kind of silly, poorly formatted with lots of mistakes. But now it's actually a tactic. You get hundreds of those phishing emails all the time, and they're kind of not really nice looking, right? You can easily spot that it's a phishing email, but it's done on purpose because your brain is trained. Phishing emails are usually poorly formatted with lots of mistakes. But then at some point, you get an email that is very specific, very well designed, without any mistakes, mentioning people that you know, sent to you at the right point of time. You click on the link, you provide your credentials, you download something, and you get phished. And I'm personally a target for lots of phishing attacks, and I've seen some very sophisticated ones when I was getting emails that look like the corporate emails or like DocuSign emails when I needed to sign some document, and they look perfectly fine, and they were exactly in the context of what was actually going on, like annual recertification or whatever. So attackers are becoming more creative, and also they use the tools that allow them to scale the attacks. And that leads us to the situation where if in the past attackers would focus on the larger enterprises because they have a lot of money, they can pay for it. Now they can scale the attacks to SMBs. When we think about ransomware, and I just had an event in Italy, our partner day, with hundreds of people attending, and we asked them on stage is what's the average payment for the ransomware? And most of the people said like $100,000, $200,000. But we know from our research is that it's about $2,000. Why? Because all those stories of a small business being attacked, they just nowhere. Like nobody wants to hear about them. So they're not covered by the media. You only hear about the large enterprise being attacked. But in reality, who's really suffering are those small businesses who are going out of business. I spoke to a partner of ours in Greece, and they told me that in the last 2 years, they had about 1,100 ransomware negotiations for small businesses, meaning it's like more than twice a day, right? So if you think about it, it's actually happening all the time. And the reason it is happening all the time is because it became extremely easy. And attackers have all the tools. You can easily ransom somewhere and then send them a link to send you Bitcoins or whatever. And that's how it works. And the other thing that is also happening, I think that will be interesting to your listeners, is that what we noticing is that the SMB, that is a vendor of an enterprise, can have malware running on their systems for months and months and months, doing nothing, not really attacking the SMB, because that SMB is not a target. The actual target is the enterprise. So what they are doing, the bad guys, what they're doing, they stealing information. They're trying to intercept the messages sent between this SMB and the enterprise. They're trying to understand what's going on. So they use it as a tool for reconnaissance or the tool to deploy malicious payload to the enterprise. So the actual SMB may not see anything that happening. And that leads us to the situation where traditional security doesn't work. This is why we need XDR. We need to correlate the events that are happening on the endpoint, in the cloud services, on the network, and then look for suspicious behavior, for the strange patterns. That way we can prevent those attacks, and we can prevent those supply chain attacks. So this is what we see. And if I just to summarize it, there are more and more attacks. Attacks are becoming more sophisticated. They are easier to execute, and basically everybody is under attack. And in the mindset of a typical SMB owner, they think, oh, we'll never get attacked. Like, we're tiny. We're like a flower shop. We're just a hair salon. Nobody is going to attack us. But at some point they will. And they'll get a little bit of money, but that will be substantial for the business. So this is what's going on.
Obviously, we run a small business here, and I guess naively we would think the same thing, but you always think that until the day that it actually happens, don't you, as an SMB owner? And it can be really costly. Of course, obviously, it's not going to cost, hopefully, not hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds, but even thousands of pounds is a lot to a smaller business, isn't it?
Yeah, and also it's a reputation risk. The thing is, and that's what business owners sometimes don't really take into consideration, is that the attack may be a kind of minor nuisance for you, but if they stole the data of your customers, you don't know how they're going to use it. If they have the payment data, I'll give you an example that I learned from a few partners recently, where a large retail chain had only point of sale terminal at every store. That's all they had. And they didn't really store a lot of data. They had just some basic payment detail information on those terminals. They were not really protecting them. They were not really managing them because they thought that nobody will actually do anything to them. So the company didn't use any managed service provider or security service provider. They just used the internal IT that would deploy those terminals and keep them unprotected, which is basically was like a cheap Windows machines that they were running in those stores. So at some point, those machines were attacked, and they didn't do any kind of ransomware. They just stole the information that was on those machines, and then they use it, especially when you get the payment information of customers' credit cards, they use it to steal money from the customers. So you think that business was not really hurt, but then if you think about all the customers that are suffering, and not everybody has insurance, not everybody has credit cards, some people have debit cards, so it's a significant loss. So of course, when eventually they learn about it, they got to one of our partners and asked them to install the security solution. They just install the EDR solution on those terminals. But the thing is, the business itself may not be the target. The targets can be the customers, it can be suppliers, it could be the enterprises, it could be home users. And again, with AI tools, you can scale the attacks. So instead of stealing $1 million from a huge bank, you can steal like $10 from 1 million people. And the risk is very low because those customers are usually not complaining, they don't go to police. And that's the real issue, because a lot of customers are ashamed that they get ransomed. Even MSPs, they're not really interested in sharing the information that some of their customers were attacked because it's a reputation risk. So that's why we are aggressively, I would say aggressively is the right word here, is we're pushing more advanced security. So at some point last year, we realized that the traditional antivirus, let's call it like that, is not enough. So what we've done, we changed the price for our EDR solution that we had last year and just basically told every partner that we're not charging extra. If you use security from Acronis, EDR comes free. It's just included. And the reason for that was very simple. We saw what's happening on the market, and we saw how many businesses are being attacked. And that was the one way to force our partners to deploy that more advanced security, because that way they're not giving up any margin. The customer's not paying more. They just provide better level of protection. And that was our goal. And that worked. And we are very proud with millions of attacks that were prevented by the EDR solution.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such an interesting topic. It's such a prominent area of or field of security that gets completely overlooked, I guess, which is really interesting. And I know from an MSP standpoint, obviously they're the ones I guess who are selling directly to the SMBs. Um, we hear quite a lot that, and I guess as we've discovered here in the conversation so far, that maybe SMBs don't take the security too seriously, and they have that perception that maybe this won't happen to me, for example. Um, through your perspective, I guess, to educate the MSPs out there, how can they sell cybersecurity to SMBs successfully?
Yeah, that's the main issue, that people don't care about security up until something happens and it's too late. So there are a few driving forces on the market that actually forcing SMBs to consider security. One is cyber insurance requirements. So when you think about it, when you need to get a cyber insurance, you go to a cyber insurance provider. They usually have a checklist that will include security measures. And that's really good because that actually makes the business owners to think that they need to deploy security, even for the reasons of getting cyber insurance or getting lower premiums. That's one thing. The second thing is regulation. So if a small business is working in a particular industry or working with particular enterprises, they will have to comply either with industry regulation, government regulations, or with the requirements of that enterprise they're serving. And that also forces them to implement security. So those two kind of driving forces, they're helping MSPs to convince customers that they need a certain level of security. The issue with that is that quite often, in those cases, most of the SMBs, they would prefer the cheapest possible way, and we call it kind of a checkbox security, right? So you have to have something, and you just deploy whatever just to have a checkbox that you have security deployed. And that's actually a dangerous thing because on one hand, you think you comply and you think you're protected, but in reality, you're not. And that leads to the situation where their SMB is at risk, their customers are at risk, the MSP itself is at risk. And it is kind of hidden by the fact that they deploy some kind of a security. And of course, this is what we're trying to do now, is to educate the market that it's better to have the preventative measures deployed before you get in trouble. That's why we're pushing EDR, XDR solutions quite aggressively. I will use that word again because the cyber threats are becoming more aggressive, so we have to be more aggressive. So I would say those are the kind of the driving force of cyber insurance and the compliance and regulations. On the other hand, what's happening is those SMBs, they're reading the news. And in the news, they constantly hear about cyber attacks on large enterprises, on the government bodies. And they don't read about the attacks of SMBs. And that actually convinces them that nobody will go after them. There's nothing really happens. They don't, even in the local news, they don't really read about ransomware attacks on small businesses. And that actually creates the opposite driving force, because SMBs, when MSPs are trying to suggest them to have security, they would come back with statements like, hey, it's not happening to SMBs. Nobody will attack me. I don't need it. And that really creates a challenge for the MSP. And the way to overcome that challenge is to really educate their customers, doing security awareness trainings, showing case studies, talking to them about the threats like ransomware or exfiltration of data, about the APTs, advanced persistent threats. And there are lots of cases that can be used for that. Like everybody heard that story about this libzma kind of backdoor where a certain number of people took control over an open source library that's used by other software that is used to access Linux servers. And basically, after years of working in open source community maintaining that library, they implemented a backdoor that would allow them to connect to those Linux servers without proper admin credentials. And if you think about it, it seems like a rare situation, but in reality, if you think about how many different libraries are used there, how many open source and closed source libraries are used, and how many things that we have in IT where something new, some modern application depends on some outdated infrastructure. It happens all the time. So there are more and more attacks like that. The thing is, with those type of attacks, it's extremely difficult to prevent them with a traditional antivirus. You have to have something like EDR or XDR, the solution that will correlate all the events from the network, from the cloud services, from the endpoint, and look for suspicious behavior, for the patterns of suspicious behavior. And then you can detect that something is off and you can block it. You can increase the level of security. You can block the accounts. You can remove phishing emails. You can do a lot of things with those solutions. But for that, you need integration. Your security has to be integrated. Having multiple solutions doesn't really work that well because you have gaps. Having some kind of integration is better than nothing, but you really need a tight integration between those security tools that you use.
Mm, mm. No, definitely. I think one of the big perceptions as well, obviously, as you were alluding to beforehand from an SMB standpoint, is that they use security as more of like a tick box exercise, and security at times, especially if you're a founder or a leader of a small business and you're super busy with a million different things as you're trying to scale and build, security can sometimes come at the cost of, I guess, inconvenience almost, and users can avoid it. So, as a through the eyes of an MSP, how would you say you should best, I guess, proposition being able to balance security and convenience?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. Thank you for bringing it up because a lot of people see security as inconvenience and they're trying to work around it. Like um, one of the, I would say, major problems for the MSPs maintaining security is the shadow IT. When you have customers of any size, customers tend to find other solutions. So let's say you have a secure file sync and share solution that is deployed for you, work in your corporate network, but it's not as convenient as something else like a Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive, whatever. So people start using solutions that are not approved or not provided by the IT provider. They start using some certain like cloud task managers or whatever. Like they use different tools that does not involve the IT administrator or an MSP. And that leads to security issues because they start sharing private data. They may be sharing account information, and that creates additional surface of attack for the attackers. Because even if you don't have corporate credentials in some service, but you have certain information that can be used to trick you into providing corporate credentials, we know that people are being tricked. We know that people are opening emails. From the data that I'm hearing from our partners, like 80% of all the SMBs are susceptible to those attacks. Basically, people open emails, people click on links, people provide their credentials. So shadow IT is a real problem. And this is where MSPs have to work very closely with their customers and understand their needs to help them to navigate the tools that they provide in a way that they can actually be productive while the security is still be there, right? I'll give you a good example. Just one of the partners told me that they were working with one of the large customers, and actually what happened is that one of the IT administrators had some kind of an old application, old service, I don't even remember what it was, where they needed to provide corporate credentials. So the corporate credentials were stored unencrypted in an old application, something like with some kind of an internal file sync and share, something like that. And then basically what happened is that attackers stole those credentials. And then they were patiently waiting for a very long time when they have an opportunity to use those credentials. And basically what happened at some point, the company, or at least that team, disabled multi-factor authentication for whatever reasons, for inconvenience or something. So they disabled MFA. And at that moment, attackers use those credentials to get into the corporate network, kick out all of the other administrators, took over control of the domain controllers, and they deployed ransomware. So in that case, it was not even the user. It was one of the people on the IT team. And then MSP was hired to clean that up, to introduce security measures and kind of reinforce what the internal IT was doing. So those situations where people go for convenience and don't think about security happen all the time. And this is where the only way for an MSP to be really helpful is to be a real partner for the business. Thinking about the business goals, think about how much time people spend on different activities. What is the most annoying activities for the customers? and then try to find solution that will provide the reasonable balance. Because another example, I'll just give you another example. So we have partners that were telling me stories about MSPs, especially MSSPs, managed security service providers, offering policies where people have to log in all the time. Like basically after a few minutes of inactivity, they have to re-log in, use the MFA like authenticator app to re-log in. And it got people extremely annoyed. And people started to find ways to avoid logging in too often. So instead of working with documents in their cloud services, they would download the documents and work offline. So they had copies of documents just for the sake of not being requested to log in all the time. And that led to somebody stealing that information because it was available on the endpoints. So that's just another story. You have to look for the balance. You have to work with your customers, and MSPs have to be trusted advisors on IT, not just an IT guy that shows up when something's going wrong.
We've spoken a lot about selling from MSP to SMB and the main challenges there, and understanding the perspective of the SMB end user, and understanding, being able to put yourselves into their shoes and really, I guess, prioritize the biggest challenges, the most annoying activities, etc., for the SMB. Looking at it from a different perspective, looking at it from I guess, a cybersecurity vendor's perspective, such as Acronis, what would you say the biggest challenge is selling to the MSP space as well?
I would say the biggest challenge of cybersecurity with MSPs is that they don't have enough talent or cybersecurity skills. So there's a huge gap between the kind of regular MSP technician and the cybersecurity professional. Those technicians working for MSPs, and most of the MSPs, they have to maintain extremely diverse environment with lots of customers, lots of different software packages, lots of different policies, settings, and configurations. So they just have to maintain a really huge and diverse environment if you think about all the customers they have to maintain. And that leaves them virtually no time to learn more and practice cybersecurity. And then when you think about cybersecurity experts, there's just not enough for every MSP to have one. So we see that as a huge gap. And there are ways to fix it. So one of the ways is to connect MSPs to MSSPs, managed security service providers, that will provide them managed services. That's why we introduced MDR, Managed Detection Response Service, where there's another partner that will do the monitoring, they will do the remediation, they'll take security in their hands. And that works for majority of MSPs. And I think MDR market is the fastest growing market for the MSPs because they just don't have their own resources to do that. But it comes at the price. You have to give up your margin. So you charge customers something, but then you have to pass it on to another vendor. So more and more MSPs would like to handle at least the first tier of issues to kind of be the first line of defense, but they don't have expertise. So what can we do here? And this is where the way we try to approach this is by using AI to help IT professionals to understand what is going on. So they can see like the kill chain, and then there will be the natural language explanation what it is and what can be done to remediate, what can be done to avoid it in the future. So every time a technician handles an attack using our XDR solution, they have a lot of information about the attack and what can be done, so they can learn. So more attacks, more incidents, I would say, they would handle, the better will be prepared to handle the next incident. So we see it as our mission is not only to help to remediate, but also help to educate people so they can actually be more productive as cybersecurity experts or become cybersecurity experts, or at least be able to handle some of the cybersecurity incidents. So that's one of the things that we're doing. And Gen AI is really helping us here because we can provide the information about the incidents. We can offer a way for a technician to communicate with our solution in natural language and then get answers, get suggestions, get feedback about what they're doing. And then the other thing is that quite often we need to automate the tasks that we do. And when technicians are working in a diverse environment, they doing everything manually is just impossible. So they have to create scripts that they can run to automate the tasks. And we built a solution or build a feature in our product that allows to generate scripts, again, using the natural language. So you can talk to the copilot, let's call it like that, and the copilot will help you to generate the scripts that you need to remediate, to kind of enforce the security policies and so on and so forth. So in summary, I would say the major issue with offering solutions to MSPs is the lack of cybersecurity talent. But one important point I would like to make here is that in case of Acronis, we're not selling to MSPs. We are working with MSPs as partners. We give them the platform, they deliver it to customers, and they pay only for the consumption. So the way it actually works is that if they sell to customer, they protect the customer, then they consume, then they pay us. So our goals are aligned, and our goal is to help MSPs to grow their business by acquiring more customers, or to protect their customers better, or to protect more workloads for their customers. And we are investing significant amount of resources into education. We have our own partner academy that we call Acronis Academy that is focused on the technology from Acronis and on selling that technology to the end customer. And then we launched last year MSP Academy, which is the educational program that is available to everybody. So anybody can come in, sign up, and learn about being an MSP, learning about technology, learning about security, because we see our goal is to educate the market, educate the partners, educate prospects, educate end customers on cybersecurity, because that's the only way we can actually help the market to grow the expertise needed to provide a reasonable level of protection to everybody.
That's super interesting, and I think that's unfortunately we're running out of time here, Gaidar, with the podcasting. I've really enjoyed the conversation. We've covered so many super interesting topics that hopefully our MSP and SMB listeners will take away and find super interesting. One final question that we always like to end on, Gaidar. If you could go back to a 21-year-old Gaidar and give him one piece of advice, what would it be?
One piece of advice? I would say, in my case, I would tell myself that I should learn more things faster. Because the only thing that really valuable in IT is ability to learn. As the market is changing rapidly, technology is changing rapidly, something new happens all the time. So, and that the advice I'm giving to everybody, and I'm mentoring quite a few people, to everybody, I'm telling that, look, if you can have one skill, that skill should be being able to learn and adapt fast. That's the only thing that matters. And that's actually what makes things interesting, because every day there's something new. You have to adapt to AI, you have to adapt to new approach to cybersecurity, you have to adapt to new ways people consume content and educate themselves. It's extremely interesting. So I would say my number one advice would be to learn more, learn faster, learn how to learn faster, learn how to adapt.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Gaidar. Really enjoyed it. Welcome back whenever you want, and yeah, wish you and Acronis and all the team all the best.
Thank you, Elliot. Take care.